Australia is a racist country, at least according to Laura Tingle, the political loudmouth and board member at the ABC. Here's what she had to say.
We are a racist country, let's face it, we always have been, and it's very depressing, but to give licence like that I find profoundly depressing and a terrible prospect for the next election. For a major political leader to be saying, as Nikki says, everything that's going wrong in this country is because of migrants. And, I had this sudden flash of people turning up to try to rent a property or at an auction, and if they look a bit different, whatever you define different as, that basically he has given them licence to be abused.
Now, Laura Tingle is not just another ABC champagne socialist. Rather, she has a veneer of impartiality. She holds herself out to be a political correspondent and a journalist, or at least that's the image that is portrayed. Her very job requires her to be impartial, one would think. Not only that, she is the staff representative on the ABC board, a position that carries yet more obligations and duties. Now this, of course, is just a little bit ironic, given the ABC's charter, which is enshrined in legislation. Note, enshrined in legislation. It's not optional. They can't just choose to ignore it. They are supposed to obey and follow the charter, even if one might dispute whether they actually do so. There are some rather interesting and telling passages of that ABC charter, which, to be clear, is in the ABC Act of 1983 as amended. For example, say we look at Section 6, that talks about the types of activities the ABC should engage in, one of which, according to subsection 1A1, is broadcasting programs that contribute to a sense of national identity and inform and entertain and reflect the cultural diversity of the Australian community. Now that is relevant here because it would appear that if ABC is only representing one political viewpoint, it is hardly representing cultural diversity. It is representing what the ABC and their journalists stand for, but it doesn't represent the Australian community. Furthermore, it does not inform people in the relevant sense. Rather, it seeks to persuade them at best, or indoctrinate them, which is more likely what they are trying to do. In essence, if the ABC is not acting in an impartial and unbiased manner, it would appear to violate Section 6, subsection 1A1. Not only that, we have to look at Section 8 of the ABC Act. Section 8 pertains to the duties of the board, which, I'll remind you, Laura Tingle is the staff representative on. Under Section 1C, it states, the board is to ensure that the gathering and presentation by the corporation of news and information is accurate and impartial, according to the recognized standards of objective journalism. Let's focus on a few words here. Accurate, impartial, objective. The ABC can't just go out on a frolic and do whatever it wants. It can't just force its views and its bias down our throats while pretending that it is giving us news. Now certainly parts of the ABC can have opinion on them. Opinion exists on many media outlets, in fact all media outlets. Indeed, this particular video is opinion. However, the ABC in its news presentations must ensure it is accurate, impartial, and objective. And if they are failing to do so, that is a problem. And it's a problem whether they both A, directly fail to do so, or B, appear to fail to do so and undermine people's confidence in the veracity of ABC's reporting. So here we have Laura Tingle's comments. If she is saying Australia is a racist country, and she is going out excoriating Peter Dutton, one has to wonder, how impartial is the reporting? Does she have a particular bias that might then permeate into the interviews that ABC is doing? That's a question that would be in the mind of almost every viewer. Furthermore, it is very difficult for an individual to separate themselves from their bias. Certainly it is doable and they must need to disclose their bias, but it is very difficult. For example, Justice Michael Kirby stated exactly that. In his particular context, he stated that it is important for judges to try to be upfront about any bias or preconceived notions they have so they can try to separate themselves from that bias. They must recognize their own personal views and then try to leave those to one side, recognizing them from the offset and then doing their best to distance themselves from any bias. In this context, it would appear that the ABC needs to acknowledge their bias, but they don't appear to do so. They don't appear to believe or realize that they are biased. They seem to believe that they are impartial when in fact they're not. That stands in stark and negative contrast to that of Justice Kirby. Michael Kirby stated you need to accept your bias and acknowledge it, and then try to distance yourself from it to act impartially. I.e., the first step toward acting impartially is acknowledging your underlying biases or viewpoints. The ABC doesn't appear to have any ability to acknowledge the underlying biases. Rather, the ABC doesn't believe they are biased to begin with, and that's clearly a problem. It's a problem because it would come in the way of satisfying Section 6 and Section 8 of the ABC Act, which is not something the ABC can just pick and choose what to do. It's furthermore a problem because this then permeates onto the ABC board, with Laura Tingle sitting on the ABC board and Kim Williams, being the chair, being in a rather tricky position. He either needs to perhaps castigate or excoriate Laura Tingle, or he's going to be in this awkward situation where he hasn't picked up on a clear issue, where one of his reporters, a supposed news reporter, is going around taking sides in an inherently political debate. This becomes even more obvious when you consider the fact that Laura Tingle is talking about immigration, she's excoriating Peter Dutton for wanting to reduce immigration, and one can have a debate about the policy merits or otherwise of doing that. But Anthony Albanese has also looked to reduce immigration, admittedly to a lesser extent and less effectively than Peter Dutton, but still has looked to do so. So if Peter Dutton is dog whistling by reducing immigration, but Anthony Albanese is not, surely that looks like a bit of a double standard. Surely it looks a little bit hypocritical. Surely it looks a little bit inconsistent. Surely it looks like she is perhaps choosing one side in this political debate over the other side, trying to confect a narrative that makes one side look worse than the other side. It would appear to be a clear issue. And even if one doesn't believe it creates bias per se, it absolutely creates the appearance of bias and undermines ABC's reporting. Now, of course, this was not an isolated incident. There have been many other situations at ABC where there have been lopsided interviews. For example, ABC would appear to be very aggressive when interviewing conservatives or members of the coalition, but rather softball when interviewing members of the Labour Party or the Greens. In essence, ABC would be demonstrating bias by virtue of how they treat different individuals. Some individuals are treated more harshly than others on the basis of their political background or representation. The ABC might try to argue they're not really being biased, and we need to look at each of these interviews in isolation. However, you obviously need to consider everything in totality. Then we have the whole debacle about how the ABC was reporting The Voice, which was obviously a complete train wreck. The ABC clearly had a bias in relation to The Voice. The ABC clearly didn't want to air any form of no commentary. The ABC clearly was trying to advocate for The Voice to get across the line. Now, clearly, opinion editors can do so. However, when that infects your news coverage, it creates bias. Then we've got the whole issue about how ABC is treating the Gaza conflict. Now, of course, there are some concerns about exactly how Israel is conducting the conflict, and there can be discussions about whether Israel could be more nuanced in its approach. However, let's not kid ourselves. Hamas is not an innocent good guy in this whole situation, and Hamas was clearly the aggressor by murdering 1,400 people and kidnapping others. And if one is to have a good faith discussion about this whole situation, then clearly one needs to consider, well, if Israel is supposed to stop their actions, well, how exactly is Israel getting its hostages back? Israel can't be expected to just leave its hostages to languish in the arms of terrorists who might potentially torture them, as happened on October 7th. Rather, if one is going to tell Israel to stand down, then one needs a constructive plan for how Israel gets the hostages back at the very least. ABC's reporting appears to have been rather lopsided when it comes to this conflict. So we can see some clear problems here. I'd argue that reasonable people might believe the ABC is clearly biased against conservatives, clearly biased against the coalition, clearly biased in favour of Anthony Albanese and any of the left wing. They're clearly biased against Israel. They're clearly biased in favour of The Voice. They're clearly biased in favour of any progressive cause and against any so-called conservative cause. Even though a conservative cause is really just a mainstream one that the vast majority of Australians appear to agree with, such as voting no in the referendum. The ABC appears to have completely lost touch with what Australians want. At least that's my interpretation of the whole situation. Now, if you've got any thoughts about the ABC and about whether the ABC has become a train wreck and a trash fire, or whether the ABC is really doing a stand-up job, well, let me know that in the comments below. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about it.